which is how will outer space politics implicate or have implications on Asian politics in general. So that's my topic. And one of the first few reactions I always usually get with this topic is, oh, this is something new, and we've never heard of this. Uh, Whereas the fact of the matter is that it's not actually new. It's existed since centuries. It's just that we haven't looked at it from that lens. So before I go ahead and talk about what comprises in outer space politics, I want to actually take some time and also talk how and why space politics emerged and why it became why is it an important thing now. So I'm just going to share my PPT now. The PPT now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Is it full screen?
Yes, it is.
All right. So to start it off, um, the first incident that I have actually heard or I've been able to trace back to when it comes to space politics or the whole connection between space and politics is of the Shang dynasty. All right. So we are quite aware of the fact that in the earlier times, astronomy, of course, has a very strong connection in it. And mind you, like Emma said, I am quite passionate about astronomy, especially stargazing and observational astronomy. And while reading some of my books or doing some research on eclipses, I found this very interesting fact that in about 1600 BC, we had this Chinese Shang dynasty, and these guys actually had something known as an astronomer minister in their court. Now, let's look at the context here. All right, the context was the fact that they had every like department the way we have in governments today. They had a particular minister which was heading that department, and this particular astronomical minister was nothing but almost like there was a place. So this particular minister had a lot to do with predictions, etc., as well. But there was a lot of mathematics and the astronomy side of things as well, which was involved. One of the chief jobs was to of eclipses and other some event has happened, right? Number one, we didn't understand eclipses. It just looked scary, if there is a red moon suddenly in the sky, or if there is some amount of darkness when there is a total solar eclipse. It's a scary event if you don't know what's happening. And because of which they looked at it as the wrath of gods. Since God is unhappy with the king, he's showing that through his wrath in the skies, and hence the king's legitimacy is questioned, which is why this particular job was so important that we are talking about, right? And how do we know this? Well, there are historical records. There are these particular the Chinese and a lot of the other ancient civilizations were certain artifacts that we found, and they indicate towards the same, right? So that is one part of it. Second, since we are talking about the historical references, right? Rockets, of course, play a very important role when it comes to space politics. And the first proper use of rockets in warfare was, by the way, by Tipu Sultan against the British. In fact, of course, we had the Chinese who had used them earlier and the Mughals, so on and so forth. But the first time it was like the kind of a really good prototype or a little bit of a long distance range of a rocket that was used, that was developed as a weapon, was used by Tipu Sultan. And the Britisher, especially, there was this Colonel William Congreve, his name was, and he was here during this war with Tipu Sultan and I mean India at that point in time. He saw this use of rockets and it really inspired him. So when he went back to Europe, he went ahead and tried to build a British version of the rocket. And in 1804, which is a little bit after the whole debacle, they created a British version of the rocket that they had seen in India in the war with Tipu Sultan. So that's just an interesting history, by the way. That I mean, we think of rockets, we think of the space race, and we think about landing on the moon. But there is a very interesting Indian history to that as well. Another very important part was the fact that after this first use of rockets, I'm sure all of you all are familiar with Alfred Nobel. And he, as a scientist, was also someone who designed rockets, which were later on sent in space to take photographs. This was again for purposes of war. So you send a rocket with a camera and launch it up, and it takes photographs and then brings it down. So you can use those for surveillance and to figure out war strategies, how could you go ahead and so on and so forth. So that the reason why this particular invention was very, very important, this using of camera on rockets, is because the whole part of dual use of space began use. And this is one term you will find coming up very often when it comes to space politics. And that's because the nature of satellites, or the nature of the technology that we sent up in the space, is such that it can be used in different ways. The same satellites that we send up give us information about weather, and help us with reconnaissance. Also, they can help us with, at the same time, they also have certain inbuilt technologies which can jam. It's very easy to jam, jam other satellites and communications satellites, especially. It takes a lot to develop that technology, but it takes very little to jam it. And this kind of a jamming thing has been done already in space. So that's one of the things. So again, now it's when it's used in jamming, when you're jamming a communication satellite, especially that is used in terms of war, when they want to jam military based satellites, that becomes an area of not exactly a war weapon, but that's definitely disruption, right? It's not destruction, but it is disruption. And that is also quite catastrophic for someone who is on the war. um, Okay. One of the examples of why this is very critical is during the whole Iraq war, right? Desert Storm, as they called it. That particular war was the foundation in laying that space technology is essential for 21st century war. Reason being, they used the entire war was fought or was possible because of the GPS technology, right? And they had the whole accuracy sitting in US. They were able to navigate and communicate with the other ground forces and troops, and using GPS were able to figure out or navigate where to go. Even today, I mean, when it comes to Afghanistan and a lot of other places, we've seen that very often in movies, that they will send a drone, and they will send, there is satellite navigation that's happening. So but that particular time in early 2000, when we had Desert Storm, that was a critical point. And after that, the military had formally accepted the fact that space is the final frontier now, and it is an important part to consider when it comes to military tech. Right. So that's a very, very important aspect as well. There is actually a very, very interesting book, by the way, by Neil deGrasse Tyson, on accessory to war. It's called, and he gives this statement saying, space attracts the talent, but war pays the bill. He actually, in his first chapter itself, mentions how most of the astrophysicists that are learning or in university are actually imbibed, in the US at least, they are imbibed by the top notch weapon building companies. All right. And the whole book actually is basically talking about how there are different elements of astrophysics and things that physicists learn which are applied in war and war technology. So that's just a small deviant, but it's an interesting thing to talk about. Um, when I'm saying that space and war, how I see a lot of kids in my building sometimes sitting with their Pokemon cards and they are trading and they're like, oh, which card do you have? Oh, but I have this guy. You have Pikachu, I have Raichu. So, I'm one up from you because I have this card. It was literally that between US and USSR, where they were like, okay, my political system is better than your political system because my space technology is better than your space technology. I have a bigger rocket, so I am better. Okay, that is literally what it translated into. And created a lot of issues, but also gave a lot of impetus to technology and growth. Um, and then, of course, in 1969, we had the Apollo missions, which changed everything. I'm not going into the detail of the whole Apollo missions and how the first men were sent to space because that's, I think, quite commonly known. And there are lots of films and popular culture literature available, which you can, acquaint yourself with. Um, but that, of course, that moment was a defining moment. However, the more important part is what happened after the first man was sent on the moon. The other two Apollo missions did not get any public interest at all. In fact, the biggest of the news channels had not even come to cover the event at NASA headquarters. All right. And of course, the mission right after the one of Neil Armstrong, they had a camera malfunction. So they could not, go ahead and click more photographs. And then the mission after that, the last mission, they had some amount of technical difficulties and they could not actually land, and then they had to properly, and then they had to come back again. So because of which also there was a bit of a lack of enough proof, which gave birth to a lot of conspiracy theories, which I will not waste my time on. But that's one of the reasons why people believe that since the other two missions, there were a lot of technical issues that came up and we could not get enough visual proof. Also because the TV channels did not cover it, so the knowledge of it was not really there amongst the common people. That gave birth to a lot of conspiracy theories later on. The other part that happened is because the public interest died, the funding died, right? People started questioning, okay, why are we spending so much time on the space program and we don't have jobs and so on and so forth? How is it translating? So a lot of the funding was cut. So space program, space technology, there was a big lull in that period. For USSR, by the way, there wasn't a lull. However, the growing tensions within USSR, political growing tensions, that eventually, of course, led to a point where they had a division, and then Russia was born. But until that point, USSR actually put up a first space station called the Mir space station. So they went ahead and put up the first and the second, and they started work on it. On the other hand, the Americans were again talking about it, but they didn't have budget approvals to go ahead and put it into action. Um, the other very important thing that happened during this era, because there was a slight lull, the Reagan administration, President Reagan, he was the person who again started voicing the whole notion of American dominance in space. All right. And a lot of you might be aware of the concept of Space Force that President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, actually, had launched in 2019. And in 2020, we also had the flag and the logo and everything uniform made for Space Force officially, making it a wing of US military. That idea was actually of the Reagan administration. Of course, Reagan is also a Republican, so it has been a Republican agenda to create a space force since those years. Okay, we are talking about the 80s, really, 70s, 80s, 80s. So, and just as a point of interest, by the way, they had even created a sort of a manifesto for the Space Force. It was heavily inspired by Star Wars. In fact, even the opening prologue, the font that is used the same font, and the kind of look and feel has been copied from Star Wars. So it was literally that as an inspiration that came on. So I know when you all posted Sigma Phi and Theory Club, you all posted on Instagram saying Star Wars does not have enough drama to this reality. Well, Star Wars was an inspiration actually for this dramatic reality in a sense. And we will talk about the newer aspects of Space Force and its implications later. But again, Reagan administration wanted to come up with the whole space station because USSR was doing it, Russia was at that point in time before, but they had to drop it. Ultimately, it was only in the 1990s in the Clinton administration era when they could pick it up, but again, not do it alone. But by that time, there was a new era that was born of cooperation and coordination. All right. No country alone was able to withstand the budget requirements for the technology. And hence, this whole initiative of let's join hands and let's work together started. So, International Space Station, along with a few other countries, launched then. This some of these aspects you all still might have heard of in terms of the space race, but the elements that people are actually not aware of is one very important aspect that people talk about the rise of China very commonly, and also about how the Chinese space program is quite ahead now and has been, it's quite good when it comes to technology aspect. Their growth has been tremendous. They did not wait for a very long time to recognize the importance of space. We need to remember this, that in the 1950s itself, China also had started its space program, and it started because of the Cold War and because of a stupid action on account of the extremist action rather on account of US. So we had I'm not sure if I can pronounce the person's name properly because it's a Chinese name, but Zuzin, if I'm getting it correct. That's Zuesen. Okay, he is supposed to be known as the Chinese father of rocketry, and he actually studied in Caltech. He was a part of the American space program for some time. But at that point in time, they used to have something known as the witch hunts in US. Witch hunts were basically they wanted to they could bring in the police department and question anyone who they thought could have any sort of communist links. So just because your name or your ethnicity would be of a certain sort, they uh, they could sort of tell that they could basically ask you to leave or put allegations on you of being communist. And because of this that whole phenomena, he had to leave US and come back to China, where he was of course welcomed open armed, and he was asked to set up a space center for them. So in 1960, in November 1960 itself, Chinese had actually launched their first satellite on a rocket that was made by them, which was called as Long March. And what they did was basically that satellite went in space and just played a song which was called "The East Is Red," and that was about it. But it was very symbolic in a sense. That is where I'm going to leave it to talk about the US and USSR race to space. Point was to make you realize that not just the US and USSR, the race to space affected a lot of other countries. Even India, for that matter, took the whole space domain seriously because of seeing the growing importance of space internationally. So the fact that we started off earlier is also a point of advantage for us compared to a lot of other Asian countries. Right. So the other important aspect that needs to be addressed is the whole outer space law and space policies. By the way, outer space politics, when I talk about it, is quite broad in itself. Within it, there are different domains. There is space policy, there is space law, the space tech aspect. There is the commercial space aspect, which is again different completely. I deal with more of the politics when it comes to my PhD, and a little bit of policy as well. So politics and policy are quite related to each other. So as a fallout, I do know a little bit about that. Space law is a completely different domain, which requires a little bit more of a legal background to know of. But yeah, it's important to kind of know some basics. So, of course, the first and the most important thing to know is that your Outer Space Treaty of 1967 was the foundation, is still the foundation for any sort of international space law. And what did the Space Treaty speak about, or rather lay a foundation about? There are five basic elements that we need to keep in mind. Right. Number one is the exploration and the use of outer space, which includes moon and other celestial bodies. So basically, what they talk about is anyone and everyone can use outer space and can land or whatever, use resources from moon and other celestial bodies. No one owns it. Okay, it's free for everyone to go to and explore. That's number one, what they established. Number two, that they established at that point in time was the rescue of astronauts. At that point in time, please remember, there was a whole race of who will send men in space, and one of the biggest worries was, while getting them back on Earth, if something goes wrong and they land in another country, then they will lose the astronaut. So that was one thing, that diplomatically, you do not, whatever, even if you are an enemy country, you respect that astronaut, and if he lands in your territory, you go ahead and give him back to the country of origin. So that is one. The third and very important part when it comes to commercial space law is the liability of damage, which is whoever has put the satellite in space, uh, if there is any sort of a damage which is occurred by that satellite, or while launching it, if the rocket creates some sort of a ruckus, or there is some sort of a damage which is created to other satellites because of that launch, then the country of origin is liable to pay it. All right. So even if, say, if there is an Indian company and by mistake they have some incident and they have to pay it, if they are unable to pay the cost of the issue that has been created, then the Indian government will have to step in and pay for them. So that is one very important aspect when it comes to the commercial space angle. Fourth part is every object that is sent in space has to be registered. This is very, very important because you have to regulate them. Of course, we will talk about space debris and the kind of issues it creates. So, yeah, that is that. And the last part is agreement on governing, moon and other celestial bodies. No one country can say that this is my sovereign territory, so on and so forth. Uh, it is, and it would belong to everyone in general. Okay, that is what they talk about. Of course, this law is rather old. So, compared to the technology and the advancement in technology, the policy is not actually adequate. And there have been multiple forums in international level where people are talking about, building a new policy on it. There have been, policy making exercises in the UN trying to talk about bringing in a new policy. But there is a lot of lobbying and sufficient setbacks from putting it into action. The three main aspects that you need to kind of keep in mind when it comes to the future of space law and space policies is three S's rather. One is the safety issue. When you want to use this space technology for your ground purposes, right? GPS and so on and so forth, you have to ensure that those satellites themselves are safe, right? So that becomes one. Then the security angle collectively of these particular satellites, and also all the other implications from the satellites or benefits of the satellites. The third is sustainability, because there's this one very famous sentence that was told by Mr. Peter, who was previously a very important part of the UN corpus, which is the wing for outer space politics in the UN. And he spoke about the fact that satellites can vanish from a company's balance sheet, but they will not vanish from space. So the company can wash their hands over and say, okay, but yeah, it's no longer functional, it's no longer a part of my company. But internationally, we still have to track it down, make sure it does not, crash with another satellite, so on and so forth. And it is getting quite crowded up in space now. So that is one of the issues in itself. When it comes to space policies, by the way, it signifies to every individual country's policies on space. Like I just said, the whole liability clause, that is one very important angle when it comes to commercial space aspect. So different countries have made different arrangements or agreements that you have to adhere to these norms, which are usually kept a little higher than the international norms, or at least at the international norms, so that later on, even at least the government also does not have to pay for the repercussions. So that is one. By the way, most of your um, about 20-25 countries, I would say, as of now, out of the 45 spacefaring countries, around 25 to 30 do publish white papers on space policies. Unfortunately, India is not a part of that. We have a remote sensing policy, we have communications policy, we don't have a space policy. When I say space policy, it also underlines what is the intention of your space program. Of course, we say that our space program is civilian, and it did start off civilian, but of recent, it doesn't seem like it's just civilian space tech. We have sent in actively military space satellites, and we are building initiatives such as Netra, which is a surveillance system, right? A space situational awareness system, wherein basically with that system, they will be able to detect and keep a track of each space asset that India has. And also, it will be able to give you a bit of a warning if there is from any other place on the planet, if there is a missile launched which is coming towards us. There will be a warning system that can give us, with depending on where it is coming from. We'll have a few minutes of a warning, or a few larger minute or smaller minutes of warning in terms of the missile detection. So all those techs are definitely not civilian space. So it has changed, and very positively in the policy circles, commercial circles, most of the circles, you would say, there has been a very strong talks about having a space policy for India. The government had drafted a bill, but it has not seen the light of day since the last 2 years. It's just sitting in the house waiting for it to be heard. Yeah, that's about that. And sorry. Huh. Since we also have a theory club here, I thought very quick glance. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but just a very quick glance on the theoretical foundations. We need to understand that in international relations or in international politics, there are two basic frames of thought. Okay, one is a realist perspective and one is a liberalist perspective. So when I'm talking about realists, they basically are a little pessimistic in their approach. So they feel that, listen, the only way I can try and ensure that I am safe is if I am superior to the other person. So I need to build more weapons in order to ensure that I am safe and sound. Uh, Liberalism, on the other hand, is a little more positive in their approach. They say that, listen, human beings, it's not like human beings will always fight. We are capable of working together as well. Collaboration and cooperation is the key. That fosters economics, so on and so forth. So we should have institutions, and we should go ahead and signify or do things which promote the liberal approach. And then, of course, there's a third theory, which is constructivism, which says that, listen, it's not as simple as black and white, that human beings are more positive or pessimistic. It's more of a social outcome, wherein your belief systems and what we've known of culturally has shaped and created norms and identities, which is related to these, which is translated into this particular sort of an issue, or importance of a particular technology, or so on and so forth. To put it very simply, right? I found this nice cartoon where realism would say, if I gain, you lose, right? That's how it is. And liberalism says, listen, we can all gain together. So that's just something I wanted to introduce you all and leave you all with. um, uh, One very important part when we talk about space politics is debris. Okay, space debris. That is one thing where everyone agrees with everyone on this topic, that space debris is bad. We need to figure out a sustainable way in which we can tackle that. And there is a lot of damning to anyone who does any activity, such as launching an anti satellite weapon, which will create smaller chunks of dust and particles of satellites, previously existing satellites. Um, so there's a lot of public damning towards that. In fact, I think in 2011 around, we had the first Chinese anti-satellite weapon test, and then 2013 we had it again, and of course in 2019, 2020, between that years, we had the Indian government also go ahead and establish that. Uh, that, by the way, creates a lot of security repercussions. So now I'm actually just talking to you about the different threats that exist. And number one is, of course, people talk about the rise of China as a threat. There is dual literature on it. Of course, a lot of the Western literature that you'll find talks about the whole, how this is a threat aspect, so on and so forth. Chinese, on paper, on the other hand, always maintain that, listen, we are doing it for peaceful purposes, so on and so forth. But you cannot ignore the fact that their military program, I mean, their space program is primarily a military program. But they've been open about that since the beginning. Not that they suddenly have, gone ahead and done that as an action. So that creates that there is this whole, competition internationally a little bit between US and China right now. This whole wanting to send people on the moon again, wanting to send people on Mars soon enough. That's quite politically motivated, to be very honest. Even India's mom mission, in that sense, it was preponed. Reason being, China was sending a mission and it failed. So India wanted to go ahead and prove it, and then of course that's been projected as an aspect. And the reason why they are doing this is because space has been recognized as a force multiplier. Force multiplier is basically a technical term for saying that it added adds force to, or it how you have magnification in telescopes. You put a higher power eyepiece, and it doubles for you the magnification power. So in that sense, it's almost as if, if you have military capability in space, or if you have higher space tech, then you have like a much higher magnification power, or much higher like power when it comes to technology and weapons, so on and so forth. So I was just trying to put it in the most simple words. um, what that has resulted in, by the way, this whole rise of China element, is that in Asia, and I want to specifically talk about Asia, by the way, because if you talk about the 45 spacefaring nations, a majority of them are actually Asian. Uh, we have from India, Japan, China, Korea, North Korea, South Korea. We have Iran, a lot of the Middle Eastern countries as well. Australia is quite smartly emerging. Even Vietnam and Indonesia and a lot of the Southeast Asian countries are investing heavily in space tech. So that's something which definitely cannot be ignored. And because of that, there are two space regional forums. So the way we have, SARC, which is the South Asian Regional Cooperation, in the same manner, we have two space regional forums for Asia. Okay, one is called as the APSCO, which is Asia Pacific Space Cooperation. It is led by China. It is under the so China have this One Belt One Road initiative, or the Silk Route, as they called it. So they've created a initiative under that, which is called as the Space Silk Road, and this particular organization is under that, and it shares your latest technology like GPS technology, etc., with the other countries which are member nations of this organization. And the other one is APRSAF, which is Asia Pacific Regional Space Forum, led by Japan, has most of the other democracies in it. The China led one has most of the non democratic countries in it. like Mongolia, North Korea, Pakistan, so on and so forth. So a lot of the non-democracies are a part of the China-led forum, and the democracies are more so a part of the Japanese-led forum. Um, I think I'm going to try and yeah, these were just like the most important players that are coming in. The reason why I mean Australia is perceived to be quite emerging a player because it has a lot of vested interests in the region because of the whole Southeast Asian aggression that people have seen in the South China Seas, so on and so forth. The geographical proximity to Australia is quite a bit, and hence they are heavily investing in space tech. Um, just a quick recap. We looked at how outer space has become a symbol of prestige since centuries, uh, and how the whole science trickled down into technology, trickled down to having a very important relationship with military, and military supremacy has been established. That has led to the US and USSR race to space, of course. Uh, and when it got out of hand, and they were sort of exhausted monetarily as well, uh, there came the whole era of space station and space cooperation. Uh, After which, again, there was a bit of a lull period, and then there has been a shift in the world system in the sense that we had the 9/11 attacks, the terrorism, and so many other aspects, the economic downfalls that have happened. So a lot of that has changed the way, the dynamic structure of the world system, that as we call it in international relations, and rise of China being a very important factor in that, which is led to a situation today. Can't define it in any one term. It's really, really complicated. When you talk about it, some people say there is Asian space race. Others don't believe there's an Asian space race. Some say there is just US and China space race. But then there are trickle down, effects of the same, right? Because US and China, let's keep this fundamentally in mind that space was established as the final frontier because the reason why the Cold War was put to end was that we had the American man or an American nationality put set foot on the moon. So that created supremacy. So if anyone else wants to say that they are as equally powerful, they will have to go ahead and do at least as much as US did. So hence being able to put on moon, right? That's the bare minimum that you want to do. Which is where the whole, okay, since you've done it, I will do it. Because, for example, let's put it that way, hypothetically, that because US has done it, China wants to do it. Because China is doing it, India wants to do it. Because India is doing it, Pakistan feels insecure and Pakistan wants to do it. Because Pakistan and China and US have it, we have Iran who wants to do it. Iran wants to do it. We have Saudi Arabia and so on and so forth. So it's a whole chain reaction. And because of that, they say that there is a whole security dilemma and crisis. That's the current position of the world. And of course, having a space force and establishing it militarily does not help this whole insecurity complex that nations have, right? So yeah, that's about it. I'm going to end my presentation here, and we will start having question and answers.
Oh, thank you so much, Pooja, for the excellent, excellent talk. Just starting off with like some very basics. So you could you just elaborate on how you're going to structure your PhD? So you didn't talk much about your research. So you just gave a general overview. So where does your research and all of this fit in? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, thanks for asking me that. When when you said Dummies Guide to Outer Space, there was just too much to pack in, so I didn't put in my topic related stuff. My thesis topic is more focused on Asian space politics and how that will affect ground politics and vice versa. While there is a lot of literature available on space politics now, it's predominantly Western, and there is very little Asian perspective to it. This whole notion that probably there is an Asian space race between China, India, and Japan was actually first put out in the American media, not in India, not in China, not in Japan. So there is a need for some Asian perspective to this whole dynamic, which is really missing. And a second very important thing, I of course value theories a lot because they give a foundation in terms of thought processes. There is a lot of literature available when it comes to space politics on realism and liberalism. Very little when it comes to constructivism. So I want to attempt to make like a little bit of a contribution there. So that's basically what I'm going to be working on.
So why constructivism? What appeals to you in constructivism? It's
Okay, number one is of course I feel like the world is not just black and white. There is a lot of gray area in it, and I feel like constructivism as a theory takes in a lot from your realist. It's got its own logic, all right, and it takes in examples from the realist point of view, from the liberalist point of view. So it's somewhere in the gray shades, which is difficult to determine. Which is why constructivism I find it extremely appealing a theory. Plus the fact that when you do your literature review and you find that there is a huge gap, that there is not much literature available on it, it's just logical that you go ahead and work on that, right? So that's another just very practical reason for doing it.
okay. That's a fairly interesting answer. Where okay, so there are a lot of questions from the chat now. I'll just connect some questions which I had with the questions in
Okay.
the chat. So
Okay.
there are a lot of questions here in which are talking about the role of
Wow, there are
private space companies and how they are going to affect the current dominant mode in which countries take the lead or space agencies take the lead. So how are private space agencies and the emergence of ease of access to space going to affect space policy?
weather mapping and other let private companies go ahead and take over that basic function, so we get some space freed up to go ahead and work on these other elements. That was the whole idea, which was a brilliant idea, and world over this model is being recommended. In fact, even during 2020, in the midst of the lockdown, the Indian government sort of freed up or gave a lot more access to the private space sector in India. Reason being that you want to foster the whole entrepreneurship angle, and there is a lot of applications. Let's face it, globalization as we know it today will not be able to happen, rather, if it is not for the satellite systems. So in that sense, introduction of them is helping the field grow. The sector is becoming huge. There is a lot more of employment. There is a lot more of growth aspect. There is also a lot of talk of using it sustainably when it comes to the whole understanding climate change, weather mapping, so on and so forth. A lot of those studies are actually done through your satellite informations, right? Even when it comes to farming and different techniques being ready in terms of weather, drought, so on and so forth. So all of that, when it's commercialized and it's kept unregulated, you have a steady income. You're also fostering and creating a new sector of jobs for people. So that is very important. As a growth of the sector, it also sort of puts in a lot of weight in terms of policy making. In fact, when the Indian government made the bill for space policy in India, it was circulated amongst all the commercial space WhatsApp groups. I've been a part of one such group. So it was sent there, and a lot of the commercial, startup individuals sent in their comments to the government suggesting that, listen, this is really going to crush us, or these points are really problematic to us. So having a strong space commercial wing is, I think, very important when it comes to overall space sector growing. There are, of course, problems that occur with it. More number of satellites, especially nano satellites, very easy to send up, create the issue of crowded orbits a lot, because everyone wants to send a little bit of the whole geostationary ones or the lower Earth orbit satellites, and the low Earth orbit is really crowded as of now. That the ones with the dysfunctional satellites are up in space and are space debris. So regulating that and having more satellites, more businesses send that up also creates these other issues. So that is there for sure. But overall, I mean, positive negatives both. I think I've expanded on that.
Aditya Gupte has a very interesting question. Aditya, do you want to unmute yourself and ask it, or should I read it out for you?
Yeah, I'll do that. Hey, hi Pooja. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, good. Nice to see you
Uh,
here, Adi.
yes. So my question, Pooja, is the space treaty was signed between only a few countries, right?
Yeah.
And even if you see the overarching theme, like there are
Mm.
references to the UN Declaration of Human Rights and stuff like that, which India as a country is still yet to abide by, right? Uh,
So,
like my question is, where does that enforcement come in? Who enforces? Like, if there is no agency to take control of the whole, like if there is no spine to it, who will who will enforce, and why should people abide by these rules?
it's a brilliant, brilliant question. Thank you for asking me this. That's
You
actually one of the most, relevant debates today in outer space. With whoever who is in the sector, I've had discussions. We speak about this very often. Number one, a lot of people might be signatories even, but ratifying your treaties is a separate deal, and being signatory is a separate deal. When you ratify it, which means you create a sort of a law within your own country, which is abiding by, or is sort of going hands in hand with the international regulations. All right,
correct.
so that is separate, and most of the countries have not done that. Okay. Second part is, in terms of who does the regulation, the UN is supposed to be doing it. The UN corpus, which is the outer space wing of the UN, is supposed to be going ahead and regulating it. But these are guidelines. International law is a soft law. It's not like a law which supersedes the national laws. Okay, because no international law can say that no, you have to only do this. They can give you general guidelines. इट्स लाइक तुम ये करोगे तो अच्छा होगा तुमको ये करना ही है ऐसा नहीं बोल सकते किसी को those who sign on to it they take it on them saying that listen we are going to follow these guidelines and make it a part of us but otherwise no there is no sort of you know rule per se that if someone has to say that you go ahead and do it. These are just guidelines that exist. International law, I mean the whole domain of international law in that sense is they say it's a weak law compared to national law, so that is an issue. And people have been talking about how UN can become a better invigilator in this whole scenario. Like I said, even during the talk, there's a lot of lobbying happening, right? Earlier on, the kind of technology they had said you can't put in 1967, the treaty or the law that they had made. Obviously, the technology advancements today, they have found their ways out of those laws. So they are doing like you can't put your weapons, nuclear weapons or whatever weapons up in space. But there is nothing about shooting from ground to space, right? There is nothing about space to space weapons. So there are a lot of like gaps in that which need to be fulfilled. But there is a very strong China and Russia had actually put in a paper in the UN also suggesting that let us have this resolution that no one will first send any weapon in space or launch any weapon in space. There has been a very strong opposition lobby of it by some very strong country whose uh, force t-shirt I'm wearing at the point in time without naming them. But yeah, so that's about that. It's just a sorry state. We have to wait for it. It's if there are more commercial companies that grow in this space, then it will be a strong enough space that people will not be able to ignore it. But because it was an emerging field, there hasn't been a very strong international structure and law to it. All right, which is the fact of the matter. But thanks for your question, Adi.
You're welcome.
Namishka, I'm sorry if I butchered your name. Do you want to ask a question or should I read it out?
I'll ask my question. Thank you. Hi Pooja. I just wanted to ask. I hear a lot of people telling me like, "Arey, isne they bought plot on the moon, and Shahrukh Khan has bought a plot on the moon and all of that." But I really don't know. Like, is that possible or is that true currently? I am not sure.
I'm glad you asked me this. No one can buy a plot on the moon. There is, like I said, one of the clauses of the Outer Space Treaty is the fact that no one can call it their sovereign territory. Even nations can't do it, forget about individuals. Those are basically very opportunistic people sitting on Earth. Who are taking advantage of the fact that we will never be going on the moon. So I will tell you on paper a plot of the moon. And they also give you names of the stars, by the way, which is also humbug because the only association which can give names to any astronomical body is the International Astronomical Union. And the only way they go ahead and do that is if you have discovered something yourself, like an asteroid or a comet, so on and so forth, then you get, if you discover the comet, you get the comet gets named after you. And in terms of asteroid, you have the choice to name the asteroid anything you want. So that's the only way you can name something, by discovering or doing some really great astronomical work that just to, in your honor, they will name it for you. Other than that, as of now, there is no other way of getting our names in the stars, literally.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Ashia, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, all right. So, hi Pooja again. Why is that India, the space policy making is not so prevalent in India? Because, like, even as we go through Department of Space, the website, or even the ISRO website, they only talk about, as you said, the two navigation and something else, which I kind of forgot about. But it's extremely prevalent in foreign countries, and there are institutes all over, everywhere abroad except in India, teaching space policy as a very important subject. But why not in India?
Let's put it this way, that number one, we were focused on a commercial aspect of it. All right. So from the commercial aspect, the whole communication, remote sensing angle was very important. So policies were made for that. This whole angle of us using it for diplomacy, for military purposes, and for other purposes happened recently. Also, let's keep this in mind that we need to have like really good, to make a new law or policy, you need to have majority in the House of Parliament. That happened only recently with the first Modi government, elections. Before that, we had coalition governments. It's very difficult to get your agendas across the table when it comes to coalition government. Despite that, they gave a lot of weightage to some space programs, but were not able to actually accomplish specific level of policy papers. And also, we are known to be a little slow in government work. Okay. So it's going to take some time. Also, let's keep this in mind that it's not very easy to make policies and laws on this domain. When it is something on the land, no, you can give it a boundary saying, okay, this to this area is mine, this to this area is not mine, so on and so forth. It took a lot of time, and it is still taking a lot of time for certain concepts and certain boundaries, certain basic things to be defined even at an international level, right? You go ahead, one country launches something, the repercussions is not just for that country or the enemy country, it will have repercussions for everyone, including you, right? Which is why they speak about the fact that space wars may not happen, because if you send a rocket in space and there is space debris as a result of that, also your enemy satellite might get affected, but then listen, your satellites are also going to get affected. There is a lot of harm that will happen your way as well. So it's a little complicated domain, and we don't know too much about it. We are not able to understand it, which is why also when the policy was made, right, it has been shared with the commercial wing, and there were intakes taken from different domains. So it's going to take a little bit of time to develop. Maybe in the next 5 years it will be a lot more. Already in the last 5 years, I have seen immense growth in the sector. The number of think tanks, the number of people talking about it. In Delhi, the whole science, technology, and innovation policy that has come in, that also has a lot of the whole STEM, astronomy, science, space tech angle to it. So there are developments, but it's slow, and it's going to be slow.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Nishant Pawar, do you want to read out your question? Do you want to ask it?
Yeah. So, you being an optical astronomer or taking observations many times, you must be seeing a satellite trade in many observations or pictures.
Yeah.
So, my question is regarding the SpaceX satellites, Starlink satellites. So, they
Yeah.
are causing a lot of trouble in observations, scientific
Yeah.
observations. So,
Yeah.
are there any laws for such activities?
Okay, so there was a very strong lobby amongst astrophotographers, especially internationally, for that matter, especially the American astronauts, I mean, astronauts, I'm saying, sorry, amateur astronomers and astrophotographers did raise that issue. There was a lot of public ruin cry on that. So Elon Musk had himself come ahead and said that he's going to look into it and come up with some solution. He did talk about one solution. I don't remember about it exactly, so I'm not going to talk about that. But there is something that he's come up with in terms of, is there any law preventing you from doing something like that? No, there isn't. And I don't suppose there will be also, because let's face it, when you're talking about a free market economy sort of a thing, the most important thing is the fact that you're getting in some money by those satellites going up. If you're getting more money, listen, that's what the focus will be on, uh, unfortunately. But yeah, that will be a focus on it. What they will try and boost and try and say is that, listen, we are developing this technology so much that we are going to bring space tourism here for you in a couple of more years, so then you don't have to do it from Earth. You can go up in space and see your dark skies. I can see that happening more, rather than them saying that, listen, you can't put in so many satellites, it will hinder observations.
Okay, thanks.
Prashant, do you want to ask a question?
I have a network issue. You can please continue.
Okay. So, Prashant was asking, what is the scope of studying space politics, and which institutes in India have vacancies for it?
Ah, uh, okay. Uh, Scope is immense. It depends on what background you're from. It's a little difficult for me because I'm not from a science background on paper. uh, so but today, like, as a domain, there is so much that exists within, like, astronomy and space technology as an aspect. Number one, when you're talking about space technology and space sector, when if you want to work in the commercial wing, the regular MBAs, accountants, so on and so forth, are also required in those companies. So that is one way, like, even regular people who are interested are getting associated in that sense, or in marketing, so on and so forth. Then if you are from a technical background, then a lot of space startups based in Chennai and Bangalore, about there is, in fact, there is a specific there is a engineering college in Chennai, VT something, I forget the name, I'm sorry. They have a specific launch pad only for startups, on space-based startups. So you can keep an eye out for that. And I know of at least 10 to 15 space startups now. There are two in Mumbai as well. So that is a completely different domain when it comes to space commercial wing. Places like ISRO, so on and so forth, are also, I saw a lot of vacancies being announced in 2020, by the way, where they were asking for physicists, so on and so forth, from background to go ahead and work in it. If you're good with numbers and you're from and arts background, there is law. So even if you've done a general law degree, go ahead and do a master's in space law. There are a few institutes for that in India as well. There is one in Hyderabad, the National Law Institute, something, NIAS or something of that sort, and there is one in Kolkata. They are the top two law institutes in India, and they provide courses on space law. So space law, by the way, is quite popular and quite developed in India. That's one domain which is definitely, the technology aspect is quite developed, for sure. When it comes to policy aspect, there is a little bit less of a arena or opportunities in India as of now. But abroad, there are many opportunities because there are think tanks, so on and so forth, who want to understand different space policies, so on and so forth, and give recommendations to different governments and so on and so forth. So there is that as a domain. So yeah, technologically, humanities wise, and commercially different opportunities. When it comes to technology wise, if you just Google also, there are many universities for space tech. If you're just doing your BSc or something, there is an Erasmus Mundus program by the Europeans, and that's like they have a space master. You should check out that. That's really good. um, and when it comes to the whole arts and humanities background, if you're from my background, there are only two universities world over. One is the International Space University in Strasbourg, France. It's a private French university, and it believes in an interdisciplinary approach. So they are open to having any background, even if you are a commerce background, MBA, whatever you might be in the past. If you show passion for space in your application, they will take you in and they will teach you basics. So everyone is taught a bit of science, tech, and policy, so on and so forth. So that's one place. And there is George Washington University, who also gives courses on space policy. I think that's that. If you have any other pointed questions, maybe you can message me on Instagram if you're really interested, and I'll help you forward with that.
I highly recommend her Instagram page. It's at Wandering Stargazer. She posts amazing pictures there. So I'm putting in a feedback form. You people can start filling it in, suggestions for topics in the future and so on and so forth. In the meantime, I had one personal question from my own side. The way space technology and space policy is developed so far, it seems to parallel very similarly to, say, the 1500s, when people started building ships and exploring other continents, where the Europeans started going out and getting resources and kind of, minorly started colonizing different continents and so on and so forth. And it had a lot of political repercussions, which till date we are kind of still facing. The countries which ended up exploring more, countries which ended up going out there more, ended up being very resource dominant. And that had far-reaching consequences, social consequences, which till date we are facing. The whole our independence movement was a consequence of British wanting to be resource dominant. So the countries and agencies which go to space first and say start dominating, start gaining resources from space first, they might end up being economically so superior that there might be like a unjust hierarchy kind of building up in between different countries. So is there any talk in the space policy circles to mitigate that or regulate that? That's a long question, but there's that.
No, it's a valid question, and it's an important question. People have been talking about this since the early 2005, 2007, 8. I have seen a lot of documents and books which talk about it. Um, Reason being, when you talk about establishing a whole space force and a military force, making it a fourth wing, you talk about dominance in space, right? There are far-reaching repercussions, and with the newer kind of policies that has been come up, I don't know if how many of you all have read about it, but the US government also came up with this whole recent policy where all the Apollo sites are to be preserved, right? They can't own it, so technically there is not, technically on paper whatever they are doing is legal, but what in usually in politics we always have to look at what is read in between lines rather than what is written on the line. So the in between line translation that a lot of people are seeing from that is that you are trying to keep that chunk of land for yourself. No one else can go there, no one else can do anything there, no one else can touch that part. And who is going there again and again, and who has the capability and resources to do so? You do. You can go ahead and bring whatever you want from there, because internationally everyone can in principle, but everyone does not have the resources to do so. So you end up having the first advantage, and that is the truth. People are making a UN cry about it, but we can even cry about it. We can't really do anything beyond a point unless there is a proper coalition of different countries that comes in together and speaks about it. Yeah.
Okay. So there are a lot of questions. So what we'll try to do is
Neil,
do
by the way,
let's
you've given my handle wrong. It's not wandering underscore stargazer, it's wandering dot stargazer.
just put in the chat, please. Thank you. I'm so sorry for putting it wrong. What we'll do is let's wrap up with the formalities, and because there are a lot of questions, we can continue after. Bodhni, ma'am, do you have something to say about the talk today?
Hello, good evening. I'm very happy that Sigma Phi has brought up this particular topic for discussion today, and I found that Pooja is giving her opinion so openly. She's so frank about all the things that she has on her mind, and she has really given a very good idea, very good, I would say, the field for students to think about, because here there are, as she has already mentioned, lot many opportunities for students in terms of research, in terms of providing different type of I would say, it can do the business as such, that means the facilities that will be required later, and mainly, as she just now said, about law, and finally about keeping watch on what's happening, who's doing what, and all. So I think this is a very new interesting field for students, where they can look for opportunities through different angles. And I'm very thankful to Pooja, the way she has put this particular topic in front of all the students, making each and every point very clear to them. And I'm thankful to Pooja as well as the society for this new topic to be discussed here. And students are also taking a lot of interest and asking very good questions over here. And that is also a good sign that students are taking interest in this new field. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Pooja.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm so glad to hear from you.
Ashish, could you conclude today's formal talk with the vote of thanks? And if people can leave after that, and if you have more questions, you can stick back.
Just a second. Of course, we can stick back, and we'll try and answer as many questions as I can. In case if we can't answer, feel free to just message me on my Instagram. I don't reply instantly, but I usually do reply.
Or even society in general, or how countries manage to maintain their relationships with each other. So that is something that I thought